Hello everyone and welcome back to the next batch of Shurima reveals. Today we've got Taliyah. Now I'm going to admit I don't know if it's Taliyah or Taliyah, and I'll probably be using those names interchangeably as we go forward, so definitely apologies to you peeps who really like this champion or know the lore. But even when, I was playing League of Legends, I didn't really play this champion at all, so at any rate, Taliyah. 5 mana 2/4. When you play her, summon an exact copy of an allied landmark. This right away, we gotta show off what was in her reveal video, right? With Ancient Hourglass, where you obliterate an ally and summon a stasis statue in its place. And we see the stasis statue right here. Countdown 1, summon an exact copy of the obliterated unit I replaced. So the obliterate, is just there to make it so you can't abuse Anivia with this, or other things, right? Because it doesn't necessarily need to be a champion, but it does need to just be an ally. And even outside of Last Breath synergies, this strat of Taliyah Hourglass duping, like the stasis dupe, I'm wondering how far reaching this combo is going to be. If only dedicated decks go for this, or if a lot of Shurima decks are going to try to shoehorn this in, because once we get a better idea of what sort of units are good to duplicate, maybe outside of champions, so the combo isn't so narrow. Again, it doesn't work with Last Breath. There could be some other units that have just good keywords or good passive effects that would be great to stack up. Off the top of my head, Leviathan, an Everglade Collector, maybe something along those lines. But for now, Taliyah, this is very cool what you can do with her. In her reveal video, they talk about how they show off how you can duplicate Taliyah, and then you get this nice Anivia effect where you deal 1 to whatever's blocking her, and if it's dead or gone, you deal 2 to the enemy nexus instead. If you have a landmark, do this 2 more times. So once she's leveled up and you have a landmark, she essentially is like a 9/5, right, with Overwhelm. Kinda, sort of. And by having multiple Taliyahs in play, you are just attacking with lethal, like a lot of overwhelm damage, a lot of burn damage. Remains to be seen how realistic that combo is going to be, because you use Ancient Hourglass to sidestep removal, things of that nature. We've seen how Gluttony and Anivia can result in some really nasty board states, but a lot of decks either naturally counter that play or just hold on to their resources in order to counter that play, right? And that's sort of what I mean with Ancient Hourglass, where it's going to be really strong when it goes off, but I think that the combo is going to need to have a much wider application in a deck that can fit in more win conditions than just Taliyah Hourglass combos in order for it to be viable. But we're gonna be seeing it. It's gonna be happening very, very often, I imagine, when Shurima first drops, because a lot of decks are going to be, again, experimental and not really built around disrupting this combination at all. So we're going to be seeing a lot of this happening, and I'm really curious if the initial idea of Ancient Hourglass being too strong might be floated. But at the end of the day, you're still losing out on the abilities of that unit that you obliterated for a round. You might be able to bait your opponent into hourglassing something, and then they're down a blocker, right? So then you can go for lethal. We have this card, Stone Weaving, which in my initial theory crafting with Taliyah and other people's deck builds that we've been going over on stream, and again, I do stream on Twitch every Wednesday, Thursday, and Saturday, link in the description below, I couldn't really find a spot for Stone Weaving. 1 mana, look at the 3 random landmarks you can afford, pick 1 to create in hand. There's going to be some interesting applications of this, I imagine, just to give some utility to lists, the same way a lot of Targon lists will run 1 Spell Thief, right? I wonder how good is it actually going to be to run Stone Weaving and try to fish for a 3 mana landmark, and then suddenly, alongside everything else your deck is doing, you have Scar Grounds or Grand Plaza. There are several landmarks, right, that you can run that have very useful effects, and not having to take up a slot in your deck could be fine. And that's, of course, not to mention that you can just do, if you have 2 mana, you Stone Weaving, and then maybe you get offered Roiling Sands or Ancient Preparations, things like that, right? Or Preservarium, some of these other landmarks that we've already seen, are also added to that pool. So I think the fact that they made this epic rarity shows that Riot knows this could be a little bit ridiculous. And it's going to take some getting used to, I think, to know, you know, what is going to be offered. Because I mentioned Roiling Sands, but like this landmark is a non-collectible landmark, so we don't know if this is going to show up in the pool, maybe not. When it says you can afford, it probably only counts your unit mana, right? The landmark, the mana for landmarks that you have. Opening up your turn with this could be really weird, because the more mana you have, the more options you get, and a lot of landmarks, especially the more expensive ones, aren't really that good unless you have your deck built entirely around them, like Vaults of Helia or Nox Cryo Arena, or Howling Abyss could be very interesting. A lot of Shurima decks, again, in the end game scenario of extreme control decks, there could be that Shurima control deck that runs like one Stone Weaving with the intent of playing it in the late game to pull Howling Abyss or Targon's Peak, maybe, to just start getting insane value on top of that. Even something like Veiled Temple, right, could be a really strong hit for Stone Weaving, because as of right now, we see Salt Spire down here, but Salt Spire and Veiled Temple are the only two 4-mana landmarks currently. So you have a really high chance of maybe getting a powerful landmark in Veiled Temple. So a very intriguing card, but I don't think that it is going to be, you know, a mainstay in the meta. This is going to be an extreme, probably value overload type card. Next, we have Shaped Stone, 1 mana burst speed. Give an ally +1/+1 this round. If you summon a landmark this game, give it +3/+1 instead. These stats are very, very good, right? We've seen how powerful just +1 HP at burst speed can be for protecting your units from removal spells or things like that, or just getting them to survive trades. Stuff like that is very important for overwhelm units, especially with such high attack power. You can somewhat compare this card to Elixir of Wrath, which is 1 mana burst speed, give 3 attack, and that's a Noxus spell that doesn't really see play. You have Might in the same region that gives +3 attack, but also grants overwhelm, so that the applications of what you can cast it on is a lot bigger. Because Shaped Stone is just basically just stats, you have to build your deck in a really specific way in order to make use of these stats, right? It has to be something with Fearsome, with Overwhelm, or you're playing some sort of swarmy deck, because of course, you know, like Shaped Stone with the Bloodthirsty Marauder could be very strong. And notably, you have to summon a landmark this game, and building really aggressive decks, it makes it difficult to, well, like I say, with this spell, you think it might be in an aggressive deck, and if you're trying to build a deck that makes maximum value of the +3 attack, including landmarks in that mixture is quite difficult outside of Rockhopper. And so you just have this Radiant Strike, that Radiant Strike being the burst speed +1/+1 from Demacia in your deck, that gets a boost once you play like Rockhopper or something, might be fine, but I would like to definitely see a little bit more help for Shaped Stone, because even in the decks I feel like that could really abuse these stats. The hard part was just feeling like the landmark inclusions that you put in were good, and maybe these aggressive decks might play a little bit like Nightfall, where they have an aggressive game plan, but they don't necessarily want to hit the board super early, right, and start high rolling you with pressure. And maybe the inclusions of Unraveled Earth for some card draw, or just the inclusion of Ancient Preparations, right, where you get a 1-drop that, you know, this actually isn't too bad if you aren't attacking on turn 1 anyway, to run in that list. You still get the 2/2 later, the Clockling, the Predict to make sure you curve out very well in your aggressive list to make Shared Stone happen. Next up, we've got Psy Scout, 3 mana 2/4, play, Predict. If you pick a landmark, grant me Elusive. So this is a 3 mana 2/4 Elusive, is pretty decent stats in that you're going to get a little bit of extra chip damage. The 4 HP is great for chump blocking other elusives and surviving in order to just keep hitting through. But being predicting to get a landmark, the math is going to need to be done on how realistic that is to hit it consistently enough for this to be worth. And even if this just had elusive, if this was just 3 mana 2/4 elusive Predict, it might not like be super widely played in the context of Shurima. Like if there is again like a Shurima Ionia Xenotype Researcher Psy Scout deck would probably play that, but we already have like what's it called, Silverwing Diver in Demacia, which isn't a good comparison. There's Amateur Aeronaut and Piltover Zon. You know what I mean? Like we have some similarly statted elusive units already that don't see play, and the fact that this elusive is conditional I think just sort of kills this card. Hibernating Rock Bear, it's a 2-mana landmark, countdown 3, summon a Grumpy Rock Bear, and we see here the Grumpy Rock Bear is just a 5-mana 5/4 with no keywords. This is like a baby slaughter dock, right? You play this early, a few turns later you get some mid-game stats for blocking. Typically the sort of aggressive decks that you would be punishing the Hibernating Rock Bear, having the one unit to block isn't going to help you as much because your opponent has just maybe gone wide on you in the meantime. You play Rock Bear on 2, round 3, round 4, then you just get this on round 5. So it's a 5-mana 5/4, but you do have 5 mana open in order to do other things. So it's kind of like when you play Avaros and Trapper, and then you have the Yeti, which is like a cheap, powerful play, and then you have so much mana left over to develop the board further and use combat tricks to protect and make use of this 5/4 body. So it's not absolutely terrible. The issue is that with Hibernating Rock Bear, if you play or draw this in the later stages of the game, it's absolutely awful. The delayed stat line is going to really screw you over, right? When you need a blocker, and you get Hibernating Rock Bear, it's donezo. And again, the Grumpy Rock Bear doesn't like bring you back into the game enough. So even in decks that are focused around landmarks or duplicating landmarks with Taliyah, I still don't think that this is going to be worth it, unfortunately. We do have a Desert Naturalist, a 4-mana 2/4 with a play effect to destroy a landmark. If it's allied, summon a Grumpy Rock Bear. So there is a world where you play Hibernating Rock Bear and you can just detonate it immediately to get a Grumpy Rock Bear, and that would be a 6-mana play to get a 2/4 and a 5/4, which again, no keywords. If Grumpy Rock Bear had a keyword, maybe like Tough or Overwhelm, then I think that there'd be a much stronger case to be made for getting these. The Desert Naturalist, I think it's just going to be kind of slotted in as a 1 or 2 of in Shurima as their decent landmark removal. It's the landmark doesn't need to be friendly. You just get that upside with the Grumpy Rock Bear. If you need the extra body, if you're in a matchup where you don't need landmark removal or there's no removable like relevant landmarks to remove at the time, you can maybe get a little bit of tempo off of this. I do love the design of this card. When cards have dual purpose like that, it means that they can see play in a wider variety of lists, and having that extra decision making of am I going to save this to counter my opponent's Ancient Hourglass in the mirror match? Am I going to try to fight for tempo? Really cool design. And again, you are giving up a landmark, but as we see here with Rockhopper and Unraveled Earth, you're able to generate Roiling Sands pretty easily with this. So again, you still get that same like 6-mana combo, right? Of getting a 2/4, a 3/1, and a 5/4. I think that Desert Naturalist is a lot stronger than she appears, but on the surface level, she's very playable. The Salt Spire here is a landmark, 4 mana, countdown 2, summon a Grumpy Rock Bear. Then if you summon 4 or more landmarks this game, grant the strongest ally +2/+2. Now again, the fact that this countdown is only 2 makes this a lot more playable, but you're basically playing a 4-mana 5/4. We know that that's a pretty decent stat line thanks to Solari's Sunforger. Even if Solari's Sunforger, you play it, it gets stunned or what have you, and you don't get the lifesteal, having the body afterwards is still very respectable. And so Salt Spire hatching and then also giving +2/+2 on top of that, I think that this is surprisingly strong. This is the sort of card I think that you could get away with playing. Veiled Temple operates very similarly to this in a weird way, where it's a 4-mana investment that, as we've seen in the metagame, you can get away with pretty easily, where players will play Veiled Temple even if you're about to hit them for 5 or 6 damage, and then stabilize afterwards off of the mana boost. but getting a 5/4 and then giving the stat gains to your allies, it's like, I think that the value is there. But I think that Salt Spire could be very interesting as maybe a 2 of in some mid-rangey Shurima lists. Again, depending on the speed of the meta for sure. And with Desert Naturalist, you get your Grumpy Rock Bear anyway. If you need to detonate this early in case of emergency. In case of emergency, break glass, you know, get Rock Bear. Rockhopper, I've touched on a couple times. 2 mana 3/1 when I'm summoned a Roiling Sands. Roiling Sands, when an enemy is summoned, destroy me to grant it vulnerable. So I like this idea in Shurima of having like a trap that you set up. I want to see more of this. I would love to see more of this. The closest we had to this in the game was old Precious Pet. Precious Pet, for those of you who don't recall, right now is a 1 mana 2/1 with Fearsome, but what it used to do is that you would summon it as a 1 mana 2/1, and the next unit your opponent summoned would be stunned. So it was a way to kind of set it up ahead of time to wall your opponent out. They had to like play something to absorb that stun, or like if they tried to play a blocker against your aggressive deck, they would get shut out. That might have been, of course, they changed it because it ended up being a little bit oppressive and unfun. But Roiling Sands granting vulnerable, I think is pretty cool, because I could see something like this being added to Freljord that like frostbite something for a round, and like being able to set it up ahead of time is kind of sweet. The fact that this isn't main deckable and you have to get it off of Rockhopper is also fine, or Unraveled Earth. But I'm loving the combination here. There's synergy with Renekton. There's synergy again with the Desert Naturalist or with Taliyah. And it also, again, sets up your Shaped Stone. So Rockhopper is going to be fantastic. Granting vulnerable to enemies in decks where you can fit it in always pays off. I talked in a previous video about how Hired Gun was very slept on. Unraveled Earth is simply you summon 2 Roiling Sands and you draw 1. 3 mana burst speed. This card looks a lot stronger, I think, than it actually is, because 3 mana to draw 1 isn't really that big a deal. You do get the Roiling Sand setup, don't get me wrong, but if your board is full or you're behind, the Roiling Sands don't really do much for you, and it's just 3 mana burst speed, draw 1, which is kind of oof. A lot of the cards that we've seen lately that draw cards are like 2 mana, do something like Guiding Touch, you know, at least heals something. Pale Cascade at least gives you some stats. So if you think of Pale Cascade as like 2.5 mana, then you can stretch that a bit to make a case for Unraveled Earth. But I think that with the right amount of synergies, Unraveled Earth might be a nice pickup for landmark-based decks or decks that really like the vulnerable, perhaps as a one of. Again, and so moving on, I touched very briefly on Ancient Hourglass earlier, and this is just, again, it's just going to be like a deny, like a Notify type ability for Shurima. I think that this card probably is going to, it's going to be annoying. You're removing something from play. You're removing something from combat potentially. If your opponent's swinging on you and you manipulate combat to kill their unit, and they just Ancient Hourglass instead, then they still get to keep their unit. Now, mind you, cards like Recall or Retreat Return don't really see play, but that's probably just within the context of Ionia, and I think that Ancient Hourglass is very similar to that, and in an entirely different region that needs a defensive spell to keep their units alive, then Hourglass should be fine. And you know, there's going to be that cat and mouse of baiting the Ancient Hourglass, and then maybe you're running Desert Naturalist to kill the statue, or some other landmark removal. And if the meta gets warped around Ancient Hourglass resolving or not, the more landmark removal there is, the riskier this play becomes. So I think it's actually at a pretty good spot here in terms of mana. And then next up, these cards here are just the card representations of the skills that Taliyah casts and the Desert Naturalist cast. So that is it for the batch of Taliyah reveals. We're going to keep on trucking and continue on with the Shurima reviews. Thank you so much for joining me for this one, and I'll see you in the next video. Have a good one.